My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 31 years old. I'm an emergency room physician. Pull the plug, my mother said to the attending doctor while I lay unconscious, machines breathing for me, my pulse barely registering on the monitor. She said it with the same tone she'd used to cancel a gym membership. No tears, no trembling hands. Just cold calculation. She signed the withdrawal of care authorization at 10:42 on a Thursday morning. Not because the medical team said I wouldn't recover, but because the hospital administrator mentioned the cost. That's all it took. A dollar amount. And when I regained consciousness 19 days later, disoriented, in pain, struggling to remember my own middle name, I discovered that the authorization wasn't even the worst betrayal she'd committed while I was fighting for my life. What I uncovered in the following 48 hours didn't just shatter our relationship, it destroyed everything she'd built. And she never suspected it was coming because she underestimated one critical thing about me. Before we continue, I need to ask something. If this story is already hitting close to home, please take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely feel connected to what you're hearing. Your support means everything. Now, let me rewind to 9 months earlier, to the afternoon my uncle died and the first domino fell. I was born with a congenital heart defect, tetralogy of Fallot. That's the medical term. I was 5 when they performed open heart surgery. The operation lasted 13 hours. The medical debt lasted my parents nearly 2 decades. Or rather, it haunted my mother for 2 decades. My father left when I was 7. My mother, however, never let me forget what I'd done to our finances. Do you understand what you've taken from this family, Sarah? I was 9 the first time she said those exact words. I'd asked if we could get pizza for my birthday like the other kids at school got. She was at the dining room table, surrounded by collection notices and past due bills. She didn't even glance up. $187,000. That's what you cost us. That's what you still cost us. I didn't get the pizza. By age 13, I'd stopped requesting anything. By 16, I was working 2 after-school jobs to buy my own necessities. By 19, I took out my first student loan completely alone while my younger brother, Marcus, prepared for the private college my mother was paying for in full. Nobody questioned the disparity. Marcus got a car at 17. I took public transit. Marcus got his education funded. I got a loan repayment schedule. Marcus got elaborate birthday celebrations. I got a grocery store cake and a card for Mom only. And here's the part that's hardest to admit, I accepted it all. I genuinely believed I was in debt to her. If you're still with me, drop a comment right now. Have you ever felt like you owed someone just for existing? I want to hear your story. Now, let's continue. My mother had hammered that message home so consistently, you cost this family everything, that the obligation felt as tangible as the surgical scar running down my sternum. I carried that weight the same way I carried my stethoscope every shift, automatically, without question. The one person who never mentioned my supposed debt was my uncle, Raymond. Raymond Mitchell lived by himself in a modest 2-story house on Maple Avenue in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a back deck he'd built himself. He'd lived there for 38 years, raised my mother and her sister there, lost his wife there, and maintained the rose garden through every season since. I began visiting him every Sunday when I was 25, fresh out of medical school, buried in 6 figures of student loans. I'd make the hour drive each direction, bring him groceries, monitor his diabetes, sit on that back deck and listen to him talk about baseball and old westerns and nothing particularly profound. He never once said, "You're a burden." He said things like, "Tell me what you learned this week," kiddo, and make sure you're eating enough, you look thin. And once, near the end, his hands shaking from the neuropathy, his voice barely audible, he said something I didn't fully understand at the time. "I've made arrangements for you, Sarah. When the time comes, a woman named Hartley will contact you." I smiled and held his hand tighter. I thought the medications were confusing him. He got foggy sometimes, especially in the evenings. He was 81. I assumed it was just the morphine talking. My mother despised my visits to Raymond. "You're wasting your time," she'd tell me. "He doesn't appreciate what you're doing for him." That was projection. Raymond was sharp until his final day. He remembered everything, including things my mother desperately wanted buried. He died on a Monday in April. Peacefully, in his sleep, in that house on Maple Avenue. My mother organized the funeral. Small gathering, minimal fuss. She didn't ask me to speak. "Keep it brief," she instructed at the funeral home entrance. "We're not making this dramatic." I stood in the third row and said my goodbyes silently. Raymond had mentioned someone named Hartley. I didn't know who Hartley was. Not yet. It would take a coma, a signed withdrawal order, and 6 days in a hospital bed before that name would mean anything. 4 months after Raymond's funeral, I was driving home from a 14-hour shift in the ER. It was 3:52 in the morning. Highway 83, light fog. I remember checking the dashboard clock because I was calculating sleep. 7 hours if I showered quickly. 6 if I made breakfast. I never completed that calculation. The semi-truck crossed the median going 60 miles per hour. Pause here for just a second. If you're wondering what happens next, or if you've ever experienced someone betraying you when you were at your most vulnerable, comment below. Should she confront her mother publicly or privately? I genuinely want your opinion. Okay, back to the story. The impact crushed the passenger side of my sedan like aluminum foil. I don't recall the noise. I don't recall the airbags deploying. Medical records show I was conscious for roughly 2 minutes after the collision, long enough for the first responder to hear me state my name and occupation, then silence. Severe head trauma, collapsed lung, internal bleeding, multiple fractures. The trauma team at Memorial Hospital, my own hospital where I'd worked for 4 years, got me into surgery within 45 minutes. But complications arose. They needed additional procedures, a neurosurgeon, extended ICU time, and someone had to provide authorization. I had no spouse, no children. The emergency contact listed in my employee records was the same one that had been there since I was 20, because my mother had insisted it remain that way. Elizabeth Mitchell, next of kin. They contacted her at 9:15 that night. She arrived at 9:38. I know the precise time because the security desk logged her entry. She didn't come to my ICU room initially. She didn't ask the charge nurse about my condition. She didn't inquire whether I was suffering or frightened or if I'd been awake at all. She walked directly to hospital administration and asked a single question. "What is the total cost going to be?" I discovered what transpired next from a man named Victor Reyes. Everyone at Memorial called him Vic. He was our head of nursing, 31 years in the department, a voice that carried authority and a mind that forgot nothing. Vic was at the nurses' station when my mother exited administration and located Dr. Angela Torres, the trauma surgeon managing my care. He heard every word. "The additional surgeries," my mother said. "What's the cost estimate?" Dr. Torres gave her the range. Between $220,000 and $290,000, depending on complications and recovery time. Insurance would handle a portion, but there would be substantial out-of-pocket expenses, particularly because my mother had co-signed on several of my old medical accounts. She'd demanded that arrangement when I was 20. I'd believed it was meant to help me. It was meant to control me. My mother's expression didn't change. She has no healthcare directive, she stated. I'm her mother. I'm the legal decision maker. Dr. Torres nodded slowly. Standard protocol when no directive exists. Next of kin assumes authority. Then my mother said the words. Pull the plug. We're not paying for this. Vic told me later that Dr. Torres went completely still. She stared at my mother for what felt like an eternity. My mother stared back, unflinching. She's been a financial liability her entire life, my mother continued. Withdraw life support. She signed the authorization. Her signature was neat, unhesitating. She set the pen down, asked if any additional paperwork was required, and turned toward the elevator bank. She didn't visit my room. She didn't look through the ICU window. This is intense, I know. If this story is affecting you, if you felt discarded by someone who was supposed to protect you, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There's so much more coming. Let's continue. She didn't say goodbye to her daughter. Vic stood behind the nurse's station, gripping the counter edge. He told me his hands were shaking. He told me he felt physically ill. He didn't confront her. He did something far more effective. He sat down and accessed my employee records. Every physician at Memorial completes comprehensive emergency paperwork during onboarding. Contact details, insurance information, allergies, and a healthcare directive designation. Most staff skip that final section. I hadn't. For years earlier, I had assigned my healthcare directive to Jennifer Park. Jennifer was my closest friend from medical school. She lived an hour away in Lancaster. She was listed clearly in my file. Name, phone number, relationship designation. Vic located it in under 3 minutes. He called Jennifer at 10:08 p.m. Jennifer answered on the first ring. Vic explained everything. The accident, the coma, the surgeries I needed, and a mother who had just signed papers to let her daughter die. Jennifer didn't hesitate. She said, I'm on my way. She drove through fog and darkness for 90 minutes. She walked into Memorial at 11:47 p.m. with her driver's license, a copy of the directive she'd kept filed away, and hands that wouldn't stop trembling. She revoked the withdrawal authorization. She approved the surgeries. Dr. Torres was in the OR within 30 minutes. My mother was home by then, asleep in her bed. She had no idea the authorization had been overturned. As far as she understood, the machines would stop, and the hospital would notify her by morning with the time of death. Vic didn't call her. Neither did Jennifer. Neither did anyone on staff. Instead, Vic did one additional thing before his shift concluded. He filed an internal incident report, the type that gets documented when a staff member witnesses a protocol violation. He recorded every statement my mother had made, timestamps included, the withdrawal signature, and the fact that she had falsely claimed I had no healthcare directive. He submitted it, secured his workstation, and sat alone in the break room for 30 minutes. Elizabeth Mitchell went home that night believing her daughter would be dead by sunrise. She slept without interruption. And the following day, she made her second catastrophic error. The mistake that would cost her everything she'd accumulated. My mother woke the next morning expecting a call from the hospital. A notification of death, perhaps paperwork to sign. She'd already mentally prepared her script. I could imagine it perfectly. The catch in her voice, the hand pressed to her chest. We lost her. The injuries were too severe. But the call never came. Not because anyone informed her I was alive. The call simply never came. And instead of calling the hospital herself, instead of driving over to check on her daughter, Elizabeth Mitchell spent that Friday morning doing something entirely different. She went to steal my inheritance. I need to pause again. If you're watching this and thinking you know exactly where this is going, or if you're sitting there wondering what she took, comment right now. Tell me, have you ever had someone steal from you when you couldn't defend yourself? Let me know. Now, back to the story. Here's what I didn't know then. What I wouldn't learn until weeks afterward. My Uncle Raymond had transferred ownership of the Harrisburg house into my name before he passed. The deed was processed through his personal attorney. It was legitimate, legally filed with the county, and my mother had no knowledge it existed. What she did know was that Raymond was deceased. The house sat empty, and someone would claim it. She intended that someone to be her. She possessed a power of attorney document. My signature appeared on it. Except I had never signed that document. She'd forged my handwriting from old medical consent forms, the ones she'd made me sign when I was barely out of my teens and didn't understand what I was agreeing to. She brought the fraudulent POA to a notary she'd worked with before, a woman named Linda, who didn't ask questions and processed it without proper verification. Linda stamped it. Elizabeth filed the deed transfer at the county recorder's office that same afternoon. By Monday, the house was registered in her name. By Wednesday, she'd walked into a lending institution and secured a home equity line of credit against the property. $310,000 available immediately. The money didn't go toward my medical expenses. It didn't go into any emergency fund. It went to cover gambling debts. Debts that nobody in our family, our social circle, our community knew existed. She had no idea the house was already legally mine. She had no idea how the transfer had occurred. And she certainly had no idea about the woman Raymond had called Hartley. But here's the reality about forged documents. They only survive as long as nobody examines them closely. And someone was about to examine them very, very closely. I opened my eyes on a Monday. 19 days after the accident. The light was that specific hospital fluorescent, harsh and artificial, the kind that exists nowhere in nature. I knew that light intimately. I'd worked beneath it for half a decade. But I'd never experienced it from this angle before. My throat felt raw. The ventilator had been removed, but the sensation lingered, like tissue damage deep in my chest. My ribs protested with each breath. My right arm was immobilized in a cast. Everything required immense effort. Even keeping my eyes open felt exhausting. The first face I saw was Vic's. Not my mother's. Not my brother's. Vic. He was standing near the window, arms folded, monitoring my vitals. When he noticed I was awake, he didn't gasp or rush forward. He pulled a chair beside my bed and sat down. He took my hand. His grip was steady and reassuring. "You're safe," he said quietly. "There are things I need to tell you." "Not immediately. Whenever you're ready." I tried to speak. My voice emerged broken, barely audible. "How long?" 19 days. Surgery was successful. "You're going to recover fully." I closed my eyes again. Not from exhaustion. Because I was trying to piece together how I'd gotten here. If you're still here, thank you. Drop a like if this story is resonating with you, and subscribe if you haven't already. There's so much more revelation coming. Let's keep going. The truck, the highway, the sound of my car door crumpling. My mother arrived at 1:34 that afternoon. The nurses documented it. I know because I verified later. She stood in the doorway briefly. I studied her face carefully. There was something there, a flicker, maybe half a second before her expression shifted into something softer, something rehearsed. I'd read thousands of faces in emergency medicine. Fear of loss looks fundamentally different from fear of consequences. She hurried to my bedside. She grabbed my hand. Tears ran down her face. Oh, sweetheart, we were terrified. Thank God you're okay. Thank God. I looked at her. At the tears. At the trembling chin. Hi, Mom, I said softly. Marcus sent a flower arrangement later that day, a standard arrangement from an online service. He didn't visit. 3 days later, I could sit upright independently. Vic waited until the evening shift change when the corridor was quiet and the door could remain closed without attracting attention. He pulled the same chair to my bedside. He didn't sit immediately. He stood there briefly, looking at me like he was determining how to begin. Just tell me, Vic. He sat down. The night of your accident, your mother came to the hospital. I know. She told me she was here constantly. She wasn't. She came once. That night. She met with Dr. Torres. He paused. She asked about the cost of your surgeries. I didn't interrupt. I kept my hands motionless on the blanket. She told Dr. Torres you had no healthcare directive. She said she was the sole decision maker. Then she signed an authorization to withdraw life support. The room went silent except for the monitor. I counted 4 beeps before I responded. She signed a withdrawal order. Yes. On me. Yes. What exactly did she say? Vic looked at me steadily. Pull the plug. We're not paying for this. She's been a financial liability her entire life. I closed my eyes. Not because I was surprised. Because I finally had language for something I'd felt my entire existence. The shape of a truth I'd always sensed but never heard articulated. I was a line item. A cost. A number on a balance sheet that never stopped growing. I opened my eyes. How am I here? I found your directive in your employee file. Jennifer Park. I called her. She drove here in the middle of the night and authorized everything. Is there documentation of what my mother did? Incident report filed. Timestamped. Every word she said is on record. I stared at the ceiling tiles for an extended moment. Then I looked at Vic get me my phone. He reached into my bedside drawer and handed it to me. I powered it on. 41 missed calls from my mother. 16 from Marcus. I scrolled past all of them. I opened my contacts and found a name I hadn't called in months. A name Raymond had given me. Hartley. This is where everything changes. If you're invested in seeing how Sarah handles this, comment below. What would you do in her position? And make sure you're subscribed because the next part is explosive. Let's continue. The phone rang 3 times. Margaret Hartley speaking. The voice was calm, professional, the kind of voice that has reviewed thousands of legal documents and is startled by none of them. Ms. Hartley, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I think my Uncle Raymond, Miss Mitchell, she interrupted gently. I've been attempting to reach you for 5 months. I gripped the phone tighter. My ribs objected. I ignored them. She explained everything. Raymond Mitchell had visited her office 3 years before his death. He sat in her conference room, clear-minded and deliberate, and told her he wanted to execute a will. Not through the family attorney. Not through anyone my mother might know. Through her. Privately. Notarized by her staff. Sealed. The will was straightforward. The house on Maple Avenue in Harrisburg to Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, solely. A trust account containing $92,000 to Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, solely. No other names. No conditions. It was probated 6 months ago, Hartley said. The court confirmed it. The deed transfer to your name was filed and recorded officially. I sent certified correspondence to your address. All returned undeliverable. I called your listed number. Someone told me you'd relocated to Oregon and wanted no contact. My mother. That was my mother's voice on the line telling Hartley I was gone. I'm in the hospital, Miss Hartley. I was in a vehicle accident. I've been unconscious for 19 days. A pause. I'm very sorry to hear that, Miss Mitchell. The house, I said. Is it still registered in my name? A longer pause. Let me access the current deed records. I'll return your call within the hour. I ended the call and set the phone on my chest. Vic was still in the room, standing by the door. Your uncle told me you'd call eventually, Hartley had said before we disconnected. He said, Sarah always follows through. Just give her time. 1 hour. That's how long it took for Margaret Hartley to uncover what my mother had done. And for my plan to take shape. The phone rang 58 minutes later. Hartley's voice had changed. Still measured, but there was an edge beneath it now. The controlled tension of someone who has just reviewed something deeply wrong. Miss Mitchell, the deed to your uncle's property was transferred out of your name 4 weeks ago. I stared at the 4 line in my arm. Counted the drops. 1, 2, 3. Transferred to whom? Elizabeth Mitchell. Your mother. Using a power of attorney. I never signed a power of attorney, Miss Hartley. I'm aware, because I have the original deed transfer from probate. Your name, notarized by my office. No POA was ever authorized by you or recorded through my firm. So it's fraudulent. That is my professional assessment, yes. And there's additional information. I ran a lien search on the property. A home equity line was recorded against it 7 days ago. $310,000. The number sat in the room like a physical presence. I could hear Hartley breathing on the other end, waiting. She leveraged the house, I said. She did. I know this is a lot to process. If you're feeling this in your gut, if you've been stolen from by family, let me know in the comments. And subscribe if you want to see how Sarah gets justice. There's more coming. Let's continue. I reached for the pen on my bedside table. My hand was completely steady. I don't know why. Maybe because none of this was surprising. Maybe because I'd spent 31 years learning exactly who my mother was. And this was simply the final lesson. I wrote down every detail Hartley provided. The credit amount, the recording date, the lien holder, the notary identification number. Miss Mitchell, do you want to pursue criminal charges? Not yet. I want to understand the full scope first. There's one additional matter, Hartley said. Your uncle left you a letter. Sealed. He instructed me to deliver it to you personally. Only to you. I set the pen down. When can you come to the hospital? Tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. I'll be here. I disconnected, wrote the final number down, then turned to Vic, who had been standing silently by the window the entire conversation. "Vic," I said. "What time did my mother sign the withdrawal authorization?" 10:42 a.m. I wrote that down as well. Elizabeth Mitchell visited her daughter the following afternoon with a bouquet of white lilies and a container of homemade brownies that Marcus had baked. She set both on the table beside my bed, kissed my forehead, and sat down with the sigh of someone carrying an unbearable burden. She was talented at this. The performance. I'd witnessed it my entire life. At school conferences, at community events, at family gatherings. The exhausted mother. The selfless provider. The woman who sacrificed everything and never complained. "The doctors say you'll be discharged next week," she said, squeezing my hand. "We'll handle everything." "Thank you, Mom." Marcus came this time. First visit since the accident. He stood at the foot of my bed with his phone in his hand and a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were really worried," he said. "I couldn't sleep for weeks." I looked at him. He looked at the wall. My mother leaned forward, her voice low and warm. The voice she used when she wanted you to feel cared for. "Don't worry about the hospital bills, sweetheart. We'll figure it out together. That's what families do. That's what families do." The woman who signed my death authorization was sitting at my bedside, holding my hand, lecturing me about family. "As a family," I repeated. I squeezed her hand back. I smiled. She smiled too. Satisfied. She thought the performance was working. They stayed for 45 minutes. Elizabeth talked about the weather, about a problem she'd fixed for a client on Tuesday. Marcus checked his phone 13 times. Then they left. I watched the door close. I sat motionless for 15 seconds. The room was silent. Then I picked up my phone and called Hartley. "Miss Hartley. When can you come?" "Bring the letter." Margaret Hartley arrived at 10 the next morning. She was taller than I'd pictured. A composed woman in a navy suit, silver-framed glasses, a leather briefcase that showed decades of use. "We're getting to the confrontation. If you're wondering what's in that letter, or if you think you know what Sarah should do next, comment below. And if you haven't hit subscribe, do it now. You don't want to miss what happens next. Let's keep going." She shook my hand carefully, mindful of the four, and pulled a chair beside my bed. "Your uncle spoke of you frequently," she said. "Every meeting, he mentioned you." She opened the briefcase. Inside was a manila envelope, sealed. Raymond's handwriting on the front. Just my name. Sarah. I broke the seal slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. His handwriting was thin but controlled. He'd written this while he still had the strength. "Sarah, I know your mother will attempt to take everything. She already has over the years. My pension, my savings, things I never told you because I didn't want to destroy the family. That was my error. Don't make it yours. The house is yours. The money is yours. Ms. Hartley has all the documentation. Don't let anyone take what belongs to you. Not even your mother. Especially your mother. You're stronger than I ever was, kiddo. You always have been. I'm sorry I didn't say this while I could still hold your hand." I cried for the first time since waking up. Since the accident. Since Vic's words. Since every cold revelation that had accumulated like stones. I cried not because I was weak. Because my uncle had seen me. All of me. And he had planned for this moment the way he planned everything. Quietly. Carefully. With love that didn't require recognition. Hartley waited. She placed a thick folder on the blanket beside me when I was ready. The original will. The probate records. The deed transfer in my name. And the lien search showing my mother's fraudulent equity line. You have everything you need, she said. What do you want to do? I wiped my face. Sat up straighter. My ribs screamed in protest. I didn't care. I want to do this correctly. I want to do this publicly. And I want it finished before Sunday. Hartley raised an eyebrow. What's Sunday? Our church holds its monthly community brunch. My mother's a lay leader. She never misses it. 6 days after I woke up, they discharged me. I was still sore, still moving slowly, still bruised in places that didn't show. But I could walk. I could think. And I could make decisions. Which was all that mattered. My mother arrived at 9 in the morning to collect me. She'd brought an overnight bag. You're staying with us until you're recovered, she said. She didn't ask. She announced it the way she announced everything. No discussion. That's very kind, Mom. But Jennifer's picking me up. She has a guest room. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Elizabeth Mitchell never let the mask slip completely. But her mouth tightened at the corners. You'd rather stay with a stranger than your own family? She's not a stranger. She's been my healthcare directive for 4 years. Something shifted behind her eyes. A calculation. But it didn't connect. She didn't link it to the directive. Not yet. Fine, she said. She picked up the bag she'd brought and walked out without another word. The confrontation is coming. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, let me know in the comments. What would you say to Elizabeth? And make sure you're subscribed because the next part is the moment everything explodes. Let's continue. That evening, Marcus texted. Mom's upset. You're being selfish. After everything she's done for you. I read it. I set my phone down. I didn't respond. At Jennifer's apartment, I sat at her kitchen table and called Hartley. We reviewed the timeline. She confirmed the filings. Court motion to void the fraudulent deed transfer. Police report for forgery and fraud. Notification to the lending institution about the disputed title. Everything prepared. Everything in sequence. Sunday, I said. Sunday, she agreed. That night, my mother called. I nearly didn't answer. But I needed to hear it. By the way, she said, her tone casual, almost scripted. Uncle Raymond's house. I've been managing the estate matters. Don't worry about any of it. I'll explain everything when you're feeling better. She was testing me. Checking the perimeter. Seeing if I knew. Okay, Mom, I said. Thanks for handling it. I disconnected. Set the phone face down on the table. Jennifer was watching me from the kitchen doorway. How do you sound so calm? She asked. Practice, I said. 31 years of practice. Let me tell you about my mother's church. Grace Community Fellowship sits on a tree-lined street in a suburb north of Harrisburg. White steeple, brick exterior, parking lot that fills by 9:30 every Sunday. Roughly 140 people attend weekly. Families, retirees, teachers, small business owners. The kind of congregation where everyone knows your name, your children's names, and what you contributed to the last fundraiser. Elizabeth Mitchell had been a lay leader there for 12 years. She greeted people at the entrance. She led prayer groups. She organized the women's ministry. She shook every hand after services, made eye contact, asked about people's lives. When the church needed a new HVAC system, Elizabeth led the capital campaign. When someone's basement flooded in February, Elizabeth organized the cleanup and wouldn't accept payment. Pastor Michael referenced her in sermons. A woman of faith and service. That was the phrase. I'd heard it so many times I could recite it in my sleep. Every first Sunday of the month, the church held a community brunch in the fellowship hall. Folding tables, homemade dishes, paper plates, a microphone near the front where people shared testimonies and prayer requests. Elizabeth always spoke. She always talked about gratitude, about family, about what it meant to serve without expecting anything in return. 140 people believed every word. This upcoming Sunday was the first Sunday of the month. I called Hartley on Saturday night. Can you be there at 11? I'll arrive at 10:45. I disconnected and sat on Jennifer's couch. My ribs still ached when I breathed too deeply. The bruises on my arms had faded from purple to yellow-green. I could walk without grimacing now. Slowly, but upright. I wasn't planning a scene. I was planning a conversation. But when 140 people are in the room, every conversation becomes theater. We're almost at the confrontation. If you're wondering what Sarah says, if you're nervous for what's coming, drop a comment. Tell me what you would do. And subscribe if you haven't already. The climax is next. Let's continue. Sunday morning. 6 a.m. I woke before the alarm. I stood in front of Jennifer's bathroom mirror and looked at myself. The bruise on my jawline was nearly invisible. The one below my left eye had turned pale yellow. My collarbone still protested when I raised my arm too high. I looked like someone who'd been hit by a semi-truck. Because I had been. I put on a navy blouse and gray slacks. Simple. Professional. No jewelry except the small silver studs Raymond had given me on my 23rd birthday. I pulled my hair back. Washed my face. Skipped makeup. I picked up the manila folder from the kitchen table. Inside were copies of Raymond's will, the original deed in my name, the county's lien records showing my mother's equity line, and the redacted incident report Vic had provided, the one with my mother's words printed in black ink on hospital letterhead. I slid the folder into my bag. Jennifer drove. We didn't talk much. She turned onto the church road at 10:55 and parked toward the back of the lot. The steeple caught the morning sun. Are you certain about this? She asked. I've never been more certain. She squeezed my hand. Whatever happens in there, I'll be right out here. I nodded. I opened the door. Hartley was already there. I spotted her near the entrance. Navy suit, leather briefcase, standing by the flagpole with the patience of someone who bills by the hour and has nowhere else to be. She saw me. She gave a single nod. I walked through the front doors. The service was in progress. Hymns, warm air, the smell of coffee and old hymnals. I slipped into the back pew and sat. My mother was in the second row. She turned at the sound of the door. Saw me. Her face brightened. The devoted mother. The grateful lay leader. The woman of faith and service. She raised her hand and waved. I waved back. A small wave. A patient wave. Marcus sat beside her. He glanced at me. He didn't wave. The service ended at 11. The congregation filed into the fellowship hall. Low ceiling, fluorescent lighting, folding tables arranged in rows. Aluminum pans of lasagna and green salad. Paper plates stacked beside a dispenser of napkins. The standing microphone near the front, plugged into a small amplifier that hummed quietly. Elizabeth was already positioned there. She always was. She stood beside the microphone, hands clasped, waiting for the room to settle. 140 people found their seats. Chairs scraped against tile. Children ran between tables. She tapped the mic. Good morning, everyone. I want to begin with something personal today. The room quieted. As many of you know, my daughter Sarah was in a terrible accident 2 months ago. She was in a coma for 19 days. The doctors weren't certain she would survive. She paused. She was excellent at pauses. The moment is here. If your heart is racing right now, mine was too. Comment below what you think happens next. And if you're not subscribed, hit that button now. The finale is coming. Let's continue. But God is faithful. And today, Sarah is here with us. She turned and gestured toward me. I was standing near the back wall. Every head turned. Applause. Warm, genuine applause. A woman in the third row pressed her hand to her heart. An elderly man nodded with tears in his eyes. As a mother, Elizabeth continued, her voice breaking at precisely the right moment, there is nothing more terrifying than nearly losing your child. I prayed every single night. I never left her side. I felt the words land in my chest. Not like a wound. Like a key clicking into place. I never left her side. She said that to 140 people who had no reason to doubt her. Family is everything, she said. That's what I've always taught my children. She looked at me. She smiled. She opened her arms slightly. The universal gesture of a mother expecting an embrace. I smiled back. I walked toward her. The room watched with soft, expectant faces. Mom, I said, loud enough for the first 4 rows to hear. Can I say something? She didn't hesitate. She couldn't. Not in front of 140 people who had just heard her call me her miracle. Of course, sweetheart. She handed me the microphone. Her smile was wide. Confident. She stepped aside, hands behind her back, playing the supporting role perfectly. I wrapped my fingers around the mic. It was still warm from her grip. I didn't look at her. I looked at the room. Thank you all for your prayers. I'm truly grateful to be standing here. But I need to correct something my mother just said. The room went still. Elizabeth's smile faded by a fraction. My mother didn't pray at my bedside. She was at the hospital once. The night of the accident. She didn't come to check on me. She went to administration first. Then she spoke to my surgeon. I could feel Elizabeth shifting beside me. I didn't turn. She asked how much the surgeries would cost. And when they told her, she said, and these are her exact words, documented in a hospital incident report, pull the plug. We're not paying for this. She's been a financial liability her entire life. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes your ears ring. Then she signed an authorization to withdraw life support. A woman in the middle of the room gasped. A man in the front row dropped his fork. I'm alive because a colleague found my healthcare directive and called my friend in the middle of the night. My friend authorized the surgery. Not my mother. Not my brother. A friend. Elizabeth stepped forward. Sarah, stop. You don't, I'm not finished, Mom. This isn't appropriate. You chose a church to lie. I'm choosing the same church for truth. Thank you for staying until the very end. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own battles with family, leave a comment below. What boundary have you set that changed everything? I want to hear from you. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe now. There's another one waiting that I think will hit even harder. I'll see you in the next one.